Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the third iteration of the Humanitarian Game Network Webinar, and we are thrilled today to welcome Kewan Mertens, Dr. Kewan Mertens. So Kewan is an interdisciplinary postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Sociology of Innovation in Paris, and his empirical work aims to generate intellectual advances concerning the way in which environmental and social science change the relationship between humans and their environments. And a few years ago, he developed and tested DisCoord, a board game, with the explicit intent of politicizing the board game on disaster risk reduction to go beyond mere awareness raising exercise. This board game, and related to humanitarian, has this particularity of certain board games and video games made in the past to not went beyond the research at the moment it was developed, but there are many very interesting design aspect in it, and also experimental aspect when they use the game on the field that can bring us very interesting insight and help for the future of humanitarian game design. So welcome, Kewan, and you have the floor now.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very pleased to present DisCoord to you. So today I will talk about DisCoord, but I will also talk about the reasons why I developed this game and how it was developed. So in this presentation, I would like to briefly talk about disasters as a political issue, then present the board game, and then bring some reflections on my work. Now, disasters, as you all know, I guess, have everything to become political issues. They affect people and livelihoods. They make visible a result of inequalities and justice. Here you see a map of the countries with the highest number of affected people by disasters. They are all in the global south. And they often become nodal points of controversy. So there's real debates that arise around disasters. Yet, most research and also humanitarian aid around disasters approach disaster risk reduction in a very managerial way, so in a depoliticized way. And I will briefly explain, not explain why this is, but how this happened. And I will do this so with my thesis. So I did my PhD on disaster risk reduction, on landslide risk reduction in Uganda. And this PhD, I finalized it in 2018. And it was a typical example of a depoliticized managerial approach to disasters. And the board game, which I will present next, is a reaction to that. It proposes an alternative approach to disaster risk reduction. Now, we will go to Uganda. Uganda is a country in equatorial Africa, in the center of Africa. And we will go to this little square you see on your screen, which is the Rwenzori region in Uganda. So it's on the border with Congo. And it's a mountainous area which is heavily affected by landslides and by floods. So here you have a zoom on this mountain range. And in the lowlands, you have floods, and in the highlands, you mostly have landslides. And at the same time, you have quite some violent conflicts, which can be labeled ethnic conflicts, but which are all about much more than ethnicities. And the administrations of the different regions, these sub-counties, like they call it in Uganda, the sub-counties which you can find on the map, they are all located in the lowland. And I mention this because this is important for the game. So we have 3 districts which are then divided in sub-counties, but what you see on the map are districts. We have the district of Bundibujo, the district of Kabarore, and the district of Kasese. All administrations are in the lowlands. And during my PhD, I showed that not everyone is affected equally by disasters. So those that have less land tend to be more affected by the disasters. People sometimes take measures against landslides. Here you have a picture of eucalyptus trees having been planted on an old landslide to stabilize the slope. And there's social norms locally to reduce exposure of most vulnerable people. Personally, I found the work we did in my PhD very interesting. This led to this kind of recommendations, this kind of posters that were distributed in the area where we present what the land site is, what kind of impact it has, and what people can do to handle them. So report it, plant trees, make sure there's disaster-proof buildings, and help each other. But what was missing in this approach was a political understanding of disaster risk management. And this is very typical to the field of disaster risk management, because the way we often understand disaster risk is as being caused on the one hand side by a hazard, and on the other hand side by vulnerability and exposure. And this vulnerability and exposure are, of course, the result of underlying societal causes, which are political. But whenever we treat disaster risk reduction, we treat it as governance which can individually address vulnerability, exposure, or hazard without addressing them all together as connected issues that are matters of concern, so that are matters that concern people, that bring together people to discuss, to take stands, and to sometimes oppose local dynamics and local politics. So this is what in some literature, notably critical geography, is described as an apolitical or managerial approach to solving a neutral issue, which is the disaster, by tackling vulnerability, exposure, or hazard. And board games typically enter into these matters in the same way. When we speak about board games, most literature is on awareness raising. So we would design a board game to teach participants about facts and stimulate discussions about how to handle these facts. So about how to actually address these three different components. Typically, disaster risk reduction is understood as something that can be tackled by raising this awareness about the causal factors of the risk by using participatory initiatives such as serious games. And in that sense, serious games are quite innovative in the sense that they react against top-down, expert-centered approaches that come down and come and say, okay, now you're going to raise some information, some awareness about disasters, and we will teach you how to do this. So serious games are innovative, are an innovation with regard to that, because there's an attempt to come to co-learning of disaster risk reduction, governance, and what kind of measures can be taken. But with DisCoord, with the board game I'm presenting now, I wanted to go a step further, because board games do not just bring information, they also bring people together around the table, around the place where they can actually start discussing about an issue. This is a place where they can come to democratic consensus seeking, but also to controversies and disagreements. And this moment of bringing people together and discuss together about an issue is a moment that is potentially political and should be treated as such. Now, in the board game, I incorporated two different views on the political, a view which is more Habermasian and one that's more based on Chantal Mouffe's work. The first one sees the political as emerging around people coming together around with conflicting interests that engage in a discussion and search for solutions in a rather consensual way. The agonistic approach to political is saying that political moments that can potentially be democratic need also to be moments of confrontation. So not just of discussion, not just of conflicting interests, but of confrontation between different identities and worldviews. And creating these spaces for confrontation, allow conflicts to be expressed in democratic ways rather than in more violent ways. And according to Chantal Mouffe, the focus on reasoned discussion, on consensual decision making, risks hiding hiding conflicts and depoliticizing these conflicts, which then would lead to expression of conflict in more violent ways. And she has done work, for example, on terrorist attacks, which are being presented as the outcome of a lack of space for political confrontation. By this, by making impossible political confrontation on some views, by making some ideologies or views as totally unacceptable, we can't discuss them, and so then they end up being expressed in more violent ways. So the argument of Chantal Mouffe is that creating these spaces of democratic confrontation allow to avoid more violent expressions. And the reason why I wanted to use these two understandings of the political is that in Uganda, in the Rwenzori region, we have very violent expressions. There's big clashes between groups, often between mountain people and lowland people, which are expressed in very violent ways. So this board game is also an attempt to see if we can make space for discussion on that. So the board game aims to presenting disasters as a place where people can discuss, such as a matter of concern, and to see whether board games themselves can be used as sources to politicize issues. Now, let's go back to the region. So as I said, we have this mountainous region which has mountain areas with landslide and a lowland area with floods. And the board game tries to reproduce actually dynamics that are typical for the region. So the board game is structured around 5 players that come together as 5 leaders of a sub-county. So districts, the 3 districts you can see on the map, are subdivided in Uganda into sub-counties, which have a democratically elected leader. And frequently, these sub-county leaders need to come together to take the decision, either at the county level or directly at the district level. The board game is structured in a way that represent the landscape, which has on the one side highlands with landslides, with mostly landslides, and lowlands on the other side with mostly floods. Here on the left, you see a picture taken in the area, and then on the right, you see the board game, which kind of is inspired by this picture. We have the board game is structured so that you have 3 sub-counties in the lowlands that are mainly affected by floods, and 2 sub-counties in the highlands, which are mainly affected by landslides. As you can see here, the sub-counties are colored in different different color codes. So you have the 5 players, you have yellow, blue, orange in the lowlands, and then you have gray and black in the highlands. And on top of the game, you see this system to count points. I will not elaborate on this, but this is to allow to keep track on the dynamics of the game, but also to reduce power to sub-county leaders in regions that do not go well. We will come to that. The game consists of 5 rounds. 5 rounds represent 5 years. Years that typically have a planting season, a rainy season, a harvest season, and so on. And every year consists of 4 phases. First, there's a district council. This is the moment when the sub-county leaders come together and discuss, when they have to make agreements. It's actually the core moment of the game. That's where policies are being proposed. That's where players try to convince each other, and where actual decisions have to be taken in common. That's also where I got most material for the analysis. Then you have the rainy season, which is a moment when landslides and floods happen, which can be whose occurrence or impact can be reduced by measures that were taken at the district council. Then you have the planting season and the moment of population growth. This is a necessary phase for the game dynamics to unfold. And then you have the moment of harvesting, which bring resources which are then useful for decision to be taken at this district council meeting and to enter into the next year. So the district council meeting is a moment when laws are being passed. These laws can be either for income generation, so these are investments to increase income for the different sub-counties, but they can also be laws to enter into disaster risk reduction to tackle moments either in prevention or preparedness or response. They can also stimulate or reduce population growth. Here you see a picture of, I think, a game moment around the third phase, the third year, the third round, where you have quite some people, quite some investments that were done already, but yeah. So during the district council meetings, players need to convince each other. They can use different types of arguments for that. So it's a free discussion. So they can speak about the disasters that happens, but also about the disaster governance, and they can speak about it in a depoliticized, in a consensual, or in a more agonistic way. So everything is free there. There's actually quite a lot of freedom in these moments of discussions. So in the other phases, there are kind of the game rules that guide the dynamics of the game. But during these discussions, everything is free. And often what we observed was that arguments in these discussions came from real life. So without inciting the players to use arguments from their real life, they often referred to their own district or to their own sub-counties when referring to these the arguments. And so this can lead to either consensual decision making or agonistic conflicts. So laws are being passed through majority vote, so that you don't need actually a consensus to get a law passed. But once a law passes, everyone has to pay for it. So it also shows how a majority can impose something on a minority, which can potentially lead to conflicts. After the game, we had a moment of debriefing, so a moment of discussing what happened during the game. This was structured around four questions, asking what is the biggest challenge in the game, how you convinced other players to vote for the policies you proposed, what were the most effective strategies to pass policies, and what have you learned regarding your own district. For the research, so to study the impact of the game, we organized 10 game sessions, each time with 5 participants, mostly sub-county leaders, so people that were actually involved in politics, that were actually coming from highlands or lowlands. A game session typically lasted for 3.5 hours with a moment of welcoming, then 2 hours of gameplay and 1 hour of debriefing discussions. Groups tended to be rather homogeneous, so we did not actively try to have both highlands and lowland people together, because since these can be quite conflictual situations, we tended to have mostly either just playing with highland people or people just playing with lowland people. Also, people speak different languages, so mixing would have caused potential problems. And I think this is quite a good strategy, because it's also allowed to kind of get into the skin or getting into the situation of a colleague from the other group. All game sessions were filmed, recorded, transcribed, and translated, and then analyzed with NVivo. So translated, it's an important point. Discussions were in the local language because we wanted to have real discussions that were lively. We had, I think, 2 sessions that were in English because it was with higher up officials that had formal education in English, so that didn't pose a problem. But other game sessions were in the local languages. If we look at the results, this is just an overview of different game sessions with the number of policies, so the number of policies proposed at the district council, and then the percentage of voting along the divide, which is the divide between mountainous people and lowland people, and the percentage of voting across the divide, so for more consensual general interest policies. The qualitative analysis led to quite some interesting insights. First of all, that participants identify with the issue. So they really form a public in a Deweyan sense. So in the sense that they really identify with the landslide, with the floods, with the game dynamics. We will come to this, but they really link it to their own experience. Secondly, during the game, participants express affects and engage politically with the issue. But during debriefing, we mostly came to more consensual arguments. I will dig now into these three main findings. So despite an artificial gathering, because it's a whole artificial setup. When you organize a board game, it's artificial. The board game rules and dynamics predefine how things will happen. We observe that players really readily identify with their role. For example, one of the players, they when talking to the assembly, when talking during the district council, he said, "I beg your attention for the strenuous situation in our sub-county." And when he spoke about his sub-county, it was about the sub-county he represents, also as an official politician. Various values are also expressed. So people explicitly said, so I'm more interested in conservation, others are more interested in making money. And linkages are actively made with Ugandan society. For example, this person saying, we are all aware that corruption has been present in this country, which is a very strong political statement in the local context. There were problems in mastering the game rules, and in some groups at least. And I would mostly attribute due to these two language problems. So even though the game was played in the local languages, there's still some information on the cards, some issues that could appear there that is also linked to educational level or to use of playing games. But people readily entered into the game dynamics, into the sense that they mostly support their own region. So, for example, they would really react quite vividly with affects. One would say, why are you voting? Are you're just benefiting the mountainous people? Let them vote. Do not vote for this policy, which is not interesting for us. Power imbalances are being verbalized, and people got really engaging in the game in a sense that some people got very angry, some people got sad or gave up. So like for example, we had this person saying like, we're just poor in the mountains and then just not playing anymore, like playing but not doing any effort anymore, just giving up, which was quite interesting, but it needs to be noticed that this is driven by game design. So this is when analyzing this statement, we need to keep in mind that this is the game that drives these dynamics. But then there were also elements, and I found this the most interesting, that were linked to real life politics. So for example, one of the players said, this game shows exactly what happens in politics. Even that's the exact reason of politics, when he was talking about the disagreement between some players on what to do. This is to say that during the gameplay, disasters are experienced in a political way, in the way Chantal Mouffe would describe politics. It's in an affective way around identities that allow for conflicts. Yet during the consensus, when I asked people what their biggest challenge would be, they would say biggest challenge is to convince other people. So these individuals have different mindsets, but that the best strategy to convince them is to find policies that are beneficial to all players. Of course, this makes sense, but the main lessons that came out was to say, like, we need to learn to work together. We need to leave out the selfish issues. If something is not cross-cutting, someone might say, I will not vote for that. So it doesn't make sense to promote your own thing. So we need to work hand in hand and agree with the common goal, which is a typical consensual way of looking. The second major take-home message was to say that we need to engage with proper planning. We need to plan for emergencies that may come. We need to propose solutions which are manageable by everyone. So that's why we need to propose tree planting. And so in the end, the arguments that came out in the discussion was to say we need actually a managerial political discourse, which is bringing us back to the points I wanted to investigate, to tackle with this board game. Of course, there's no need to actually engage in conflicts around disasters um, if people don't consider this important, if they consider it's possible to handle the things in a technocratic managerial way, that's no problem. But if you engage in conflicts, why ignoring these conflicts discursively? And that's a question that was raised to me. And different reasons for that are, I think, that there is an incapacity to conceive conflicts because disaster risk reduction has been depoliticized. So there's kind of no other posture possible. There's no other positioning possible than to tackle these conflicts in a managerial way. Secondly, I think the board game itself, because it fixes power relations, notably between mountainous people and lowland people, is kind of preventing a central issue in politics is the contingency and the adaptability and the negotiability of positions, and this is made impossible by the board game. So I think that's a real limitation of the board game. If the purpose is to create a political issue, you need also to allow for the flexibility of politics, and this was potentially not attained with the board game. And lastly, the whole exercise resolves around a Western concept, disaster risk reduction, with a Western tool, a board game, which might not leave much space for internal critique and local knowledges, which might be relevant for the local political situation. And so that's how I come to recommendations based on my experience with DisCoord. I think serious games have a real potential to treat issues as matters of concern, so not as matters of facts, but as matters of concerns, in that it's in the sense that they bring people together around an issue which is both technical and political, which is both natural and social, and which allows people to talk about it, to discuss about it in a consensual or in a conflictive way, that doesn't matter, but leaving space for this either this consensus or this conflict. So board games have a potential for doing more than awareness raising, but really leaving place for space. Of course, to do this, you need to start from the local context or design. You need to make the game dynamics as simple as possible, but I guess all of you know this very well. I think these are things that have been reached in DisCoord, which I think work well. Things that did not work well or were not well done, I think, in DisCoord, is that the local culture should be the start from designing the game, which has not been the case here. So you really need to either co-create the game and also consider not making a board game at all. I think in the Ugandan context, it might be more relevant to engage in theater play or in songs than making a board game. So that's important to keep in mind. You should not fix power relation when you design the game. I think that is something I haven't engaged with, because when I designed the game, I really thought of fixing these power relations. So that's something that would need to be developed further, I think, in other games. And of course, you need to make sure the game is run in local languages. To conclude, disaster risk as a matter of concern prevents premature closure of debates. Confrontations then become possible but are not necessary. And purely managerial approach, purely disaster awareness raising can be avoided. But this is not self-evident because it goes against the dominant approach in disaster risk reduction. But I think well-designed educational tools or board games have the potential for changing this approach. And in my research, in my paper, I made some recommendations for designing such tools. Thank you for your attention and for your interest, and comments and reflections are much appreciated, either now or since this is being streamed and published online. You can always reach me on my email address.
Great, thank you, Kewan. That was really great to share this this experience that is quite unique. I mean, I find really interesting the approach that is not really awareness, that is not training, that is really more about a sense of politic impact or into disaster. That is like, even if it makes like it creates some attention to that, it feel that I feel that this game is really very different than many approach in such context. I remember that you last year you shared something about the playtest, because I think you were not able to go to some places yourself to do the playtest, and there was a reason for that. Maybe you can remind me why it was.
Yes, yeah. So we did 10 game sessions to get the data, but before that we did quite some tests in Uganda together with some local researchers that co-developed the game, like that were involved in developing the game, but they didn't really co-develop it in the sense that it was a project that was run from Belgium, and that was the initiative was really on our side. So that when I say we should co-create the game, I think there's a real effort to do there to make it really co-created. But still, it was co-developed in the sense that they were actively involved in refining the game, in testing it, in developing the way to then implement it in Uganda. And this was important because implementation itself, I personally only attended 2 sessions, 2 out of the 10 final sessions, because my presence as a white person very likely biased the results, in the sense that NGOs have been working for years in the region, working on disaster risk reduction, bringing always the same message about governance, about awareness raising, about planting trees. Actually, it's always planting trees that is being promoted. And as if I would have been present, because often these NGOs are partly run by white people. If I would have been present, this would likely have pushed people to respond in the direction anticipated. So this might have prevented people from really engaging in the game. While now the sessions have been ran um, mostly by people from the region that were from the local university, from Mountains of the Moon University, but they were the ones running the games in the mountains, and I think that has allowed more interesting results.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't know if we have a question online.
We
Sorry, I didn't get the answer. Okay, so then I have another one, because maybe I missed it, but there is this very important card of corruption that you can have in your hand. And so during each round, you have this phase of negotiating the policy that you want to establish. People propose some policies, and people are voting for it or not. But each player, so each chief of village, each leader has one card of corruption, and with this card you can literally cancel a proposal. And I mean, that's a card that could be played really by someone who disagree what happens, but it was not exactly the way they played it. And
yes,
in the test.
Thank you for raising this. Actually, this corruption card was introduced to allow different ways of doing politics in the game, for allowing because during the district council, people negotiate, they discuss politics, but they discuss measure. But once they are being voted, so with just a majority vote, we have 5 players. So as soon as 3 persons vote for it, it's being imposed on everyone, and everyone has to pay for it. And there was a risk there of having always 3 persons, 3 players colliding and imposing everything on everyone. While in real politics, you always have the possibility to defect, to actually saying, I'm getting out of this, and I'm breaking the whole thing. it just won't work. I'm leaving. But of course, in a board game, you can't do this. And with the corruption card, you introduce this possibility of a threat to actually break down the whole thing. So if a player would play the corruption card, that would cancel the policy totally, but after that, after the moment the policy has been paid. So this would be a cost to everyone. So you implement the policy, and then you play the corruption card, and then the policy doesn't have effect. And what happened in the game, actually in the gameplay, and I found this super interesting, and that's why it's useful to have these films where you film the game, is that people would use the corruption card as a threat. So I don't think it has ever been played. Nobody ever used the corruption card, but often they would hold it up just like that during the negotiations, or like just shake it a bit, or sometimes also refer it in words, saying like, I will play this if you impose this on me. And this worked very effectively. And it's a way actually of bringing in potential violent conflict, bringing in conflictual situation into the sphere, into the arena of the political discussions, and doing this in a bringing this violence in a different way actually, and allowing for this threat. And I found that this worked well. It was very interesting how this appeared several times in the game.
That's interesting. So create a mechanic that is not actually used as a mechanic, but just as a
threat.
weight.
Yeah. But I personally, we didn't expect this would only be used as a threat. We expected this would actually be being used at some point. It has mostly been used as something for the discussions to push in certain directions.
Okay. So I don't know, Olivia or Khaled, if you have questions also to Kewan. Then maybe there is also another question, because you are not coming from a game background. I'm sure you are a board game player, and you were before designing the game. And so you decide to use a game to solve some research question, and you made also other type of research for your work that were not game based. And from your experience, what was the major difference, maybe in the protocol or the way you run it, compared to other research you had?
So I've been engaging in quite some different research methods. So for my PhD, I did a quantitative household survey, which allows you to really have quantitative data for more econometric analysis. Of course, the board game is very different because it allows you to engage with real persons and to engage with real discussions. After my PhD, I engaged more into qualitative research, notably with policymakers also. And I think the also in focus group discussions and so on. I think the board game is interesting because it creates a less formal setting, so it allows people to get involved in something, and while being involved, discuss and bring up things. We really had a lot of game dynamics that were verbally linked to ongoing political discussions in the region. So I think that worked very well. And so as a research method, I think in that sense it's useful. But on the other hand, I also think it has quite some limitations in the sense that the board game very much frames the dynamics, frames the discussion, and might push the discussion in a direction which is desired or implicitly desired by the game designer. So I think a board game in that sense should not be a main research tool to understand local dynamics. I think it's a very useful tool to make things debatable, to influence a local situation. So when a humanitarian organization or a development NGO would like to push for for more political approaches to certain disasters. And so I think for that, this board game is very useful. But for really doing research on the local dynamics, I think one-to-one discussions or focus group discussions are more interesting because they allow to go deeper and to get more things that are from the people themselves and not directed by the board game.
Okay, then I mean the situation you created is pertinent locally, but is it something that you can apply in other countries, or in it's not, I think, this phenomena of mountain person and the valley person is not specific to this particular region and may occur.
No, I think there's always groups that have different identities and different opinions. In every, like in Belgium, we have Flemish and French-speaking people. In I now also work around the swamp in France, where you have the people living close to the swamp really identifying with the swamp and having very strong opinions against people that are further around. But there's always a risk when you formalize this into a board game that you too much simplify or essentialize things and thereby lose the complexity of real life politics. And I think this is a strong weakness of this board game, is that it might have fixed things, and that by fixing you actually reduce the possibilities of really out of the box solutions. So I think that I think it's a very difficult exercise to make it both simple enough, and at the same time fluid enough.
Okay, then I think that's it for today. I want to thank you again for presenting all this really great work to us, and we will happy to share it on the CGL website where people will be able to consult it. So
thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very honored to be allowed to present my work, and I hope you will keep on doing your important work on board games, because I think it's very useful, very relevant, and interesting. Fun is
okay,
important.
so
Yeah.
I think it's time to close the stream, and then bye bye. We keep you update on the website.
Thank you.
Bye bye.